Okay, now let's talk about the last section of your paper. Since some of you is already done with the data gathering, and I believe you are now doing the results section, you have to be familiar on how to do the discussion na kasi ito na yung next after the results section. Now, when I discussed the results section, I told you to just present your result using tables or even through textual presentation, and some of you may be required to do graphical presentation of results. But I told you not to include interpretations doon. Just have to present it, describe what is in your table, and then that's it. Now, the interpretation class will be included here on the last section, okay? That's the purpose of the discussion section, to give interpretation to the results of the finding, the results of the study, and describe the significance of the findings in light with what is already existing or what is already known about your topic. So after presenting your result, you have to explain it, highlight the most important ones, and compare it with the existing body of knowledge, or compare it with related studies, whether your result affirms what is already known about your problem, or either your result contradicts to it. Okay, now in writing the discussion section, it is always connected with the introduction. Just like the result, you have to arrange the discussion based on the SOP. Okay? So, di ba yung arrangement of the results in the results section is based on the arrangement of SOP. If what is your SOP number 1, that will be your table 1. That is how you present your results. That is also true for the discussion section. You have to discuss first the results for SOP number 1 before moving on to the next questions. Okay? Hindi pwedeng nauna mong i-discuss si SOP number 4 kesa kay SOP number 1. Okay? So again, that is always connected to the introduction. You have to arrange the discussion based on the SOP. And at the same time, after discussing all the findings, you have to make a clear decision on what are you going to do with your hypothesis. Okay, remember after the SOP, you have there the hypothesis, which is your tentative solution to your problem, or an educated guess, a proposition class. Therefore, it is also important that at the end of your research, you have to be clear with your readers whether you are accepting or rejecting your hypothesis. So that is again based on the results of your study. Now, in explaining the results of your study, you have to back it up with literatures or even studies. Okay, again, during the explanation, you have to support it with evidences. And where are you going to get these evidences? It has to be from the RRL ng study ninyo. Okay, so you have to identify parts of your RRL that would support your findings. Okay, now you also have to include studies and clearly state in the discussion whether your study has the same result with that of the other authors, or kung magkaiba kayo ng result. Okay, that is the reason why nakasulat dyan sa screen, the discussion section is always connected with your introduction. Remember, the SOP, the hypothesis, and the RRL are all parts of the introduction section. Okay, now what makes an effective discussion? Now take note when you're going to make your discussion, you have to first go back with the purpose or the objective of your study. Okay, go back first. Excuse me. Do not just directly start with the SOP number 1, but please restate first the objectives of your study and just a little description of your methodology. Okay, that is just to remind your reader that this is your objectives and this is how you obtain the necessary data. Okay, now a successful discussion section puts your findings in context. Therefore, it should include the following. Number 1, the results of your study. So after reminding your reader about the objectives of your study, magsa-start ka na sa results. So syempre sa SOP number 1, you have to highlight the most important one. Hindi mo sasabihin lahat ng results mo ulit kasi na-present mo na yon sa previous section. So again, ang gagawin, in the discussion section, you have to state again the results of the study, but you just have to include the most important one. Okay, the key findings. Tapos, pag na-present mo na siya ulit, you will have to give the discussion na, the interpretation of that result. Now, aside from the interpretation, you have to include also a discussion about the implication of the findings. Okay? When you say implication, bang importance niyan sa reader ninyo? Ano bang importance niyan doon sa people or group of people that you have identified in the significance of your study? Ano bang magiging resulta ng findings ninyo? Ano ang kanyang significance? Okay? And then after that, you have to again back it up or support your result with evidences. These evidences again are from your related literatures and your studies. Now, in case that you cannot find any supporting details from your RRL, you may look again from sources like books or the internet for information or for studies that would back up your results. And you just add it in your paper. Okay, pwede yun. For example, ito na yung result ninyo pero nung bumalik kayo doon sa inyong RRL, wala talaga kayong na-include na pang backup. So, pwedeng maghanap ulit. Okay, you just have to add it sa paper ninyo. Now, aside from that, aside from backing it up with supporting evidences, you may also give comparisons to existing studies. Kasi meron naman talaga kayong studies na related sa study ninyo. Okay, may makikita talaga kayong studies na again related sa study ninyo. Some may be conducted sa other places pero you have the same problem. So pwede yun, and then you just have to give comparison whether you have the same findings or not. That's what makes the discussion section effective. Now, before you start writing the discussion section, you may ask yourselves the following questions so that this may guide you in writing para ma-formulate niyo buo yung inyong discussion section. So number 1, was my hypothesis correct? So ito talaga yung highlight of the discussion section. After analyzing and interpreting the findings, you really have to go back sa hypothesis ninyo. Kasi you really have to make a sound decision about it. Wait lang. Battery is running. So again, after assessing the findings of your study, you really have to think about your hypothesis, whether that was correct or not. Now, if the hypothesis is partially or entirely different, you have to think of what can be learned from the results. So you have to explain why you are rejecting your hypothesis. Diba? When you say your hypothesis is just partially correct or entirely different, you really need to give explanation to your reader. Why? Why is it not correct? What can we learn? What can we get from the findings of your study? Why it does not affirm your hypothesis? Now, number 3, how do the conclusions reshape or add onto the existing knowledge in the field? What does previous research say about the topic? So, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina pa, na in the discussion section, you really have to go back sa RRL ninyo. Kasi sa RRL, you can see there the existing informations about your topic, as well as the existing studies that are related to your research. Okay? So, whether this information affirm your results or not. Now, why are the results important or relevant to your audience? Do they add further evidence to a scientific consensus or disprove prior studies? So in this part, you are actually into the implications of your findings. Meaning, you have to think also about how can your audience benefit from the findings of your study, or the findings of your study back can be an addition to the existing scientific body of knowledge. Now, how can future research build on these observations, and what are the key experiments that must be done? Now, this one is an important part. Remember in high school, you have actually done, diba, a research. Pero, you use the old format for research. Kasi, ngayon sa atin, we are using the IMRAD, right? Pero dati, you have the chapter 5. Ang title ng chapter 5, nakalimutan ko. Diba that's conclusion and recommendation. Ayan ata yung findings of the study, summary of findings, conclusions, and recommendations. I think that's it. That's the title of the chapter 5. Dati, yung dating format natin. So, kung nakikita ninyo, discussion na lang siya after the results for the IMRAD format. Now, do not forget, class, na even if we cannot see in the title the recommendation, you still have to include the recommendation, but in the discussion section na. Okay? So, after highlighting the results of your study, giving interpretation, you will be giving recommendations also. So you have to go back to the significance of your study, review the people or the group of people you have identified there, and suggest or recommend things that must be done based on the findings of your study. Okay? And what is the take-home message you want your reader to leave? Kasi that should be highlighted also in the discussion section. So ito yung mga dapat nakalagay sa discussion section ha. I'm not saying na that you should just have 3 paragraphs. No, it's just that this is divided into 3 parts. Sa first part ng inyong discussion section, that is where you highlight the findings, the key findings of your study, and you give interpretations. And as you give interpretations, you have to again back it up with supporting evidences from your related literatures. Okay? So you have to arrange that again according to the statement of the problem. Now, sa second part of your discussion, this is where you are going to compare and contrast the results of your study to the previous ones. So this is on the related studies na part. So if you have related studies that are similar to your paper, you have to give comparison whether you got the same findings or your finding is disproving their result, okay? And then you also have to add in the discussion section the strengths of your paper. Kasi remember, meron mga related studies. Now, how is your study different from theirs? What are the strengths of your studies? And besides the strengths, you may also include the limitations of your study. So, example of limitation, I have this one group na their respondents are personnels from the hospitals, and they find it very difficult to achieve the number of supposedly respondents because some of the hospitals in Jensen did not answer their request to conduct the study. So only limited number of hospitals yung pumayag, yung the rest wala ng response. So hindi nila na-achieve yung number of respondents supposedly. So that has become a limitation to their study. I told them to just place that in the discussion section that your results are only limited to this group of people kasi ito lang yung pumayag. So, depende yan sa inyo kung may nakita kayong limitation sa study. Okay? So, in the second part also, this is where you discuss if you have unexpected findings. Yung mga findings na supposedly hindi niya siya na-foresee even in your SOP, even in your hypothesis. And then we have the last part of your discussion. You may summarize everything, your hypothesis. This is where you are going to give the clear decision on whether you are accepting or rejecting the hypothesis. Okay? And then you may also, again, restate the purpose of your study, and you have to state also whether you have fulfilled that objective. And then you may highlight the significance of the study, meaning the implication, and at the same time, you go back to the significance of the study and assess there whether makaka-help ba talaga yung results ninyo sa mga people or group of people na yon na na-identify sa significance of the study. And then discuss unanswered question if ever there is any, and potential future research, meaning the end part of your discussion section will be intended for the recommendation. If ever meron kayong ma-recommend, but again, that should be based on the findings of your study. If there are unanswered questions, then you may recommend things that should be done in order for the future researchers to answer that unanswered question. Okay? Ito yung mga tatlong parts. Pero I'm not saying na tatlong paragraph lang talaga ito. I will be expecting that the discussion section will be more lengthy than the results section. Okay? Now again, the purpose, the real purpose of the discussion section is to give interpretation. Now, what are the contents of the interpretation of your results? Syempre, number one, the condition. This is referring class to the findings of your study. Meaning, do not just give directly the interpretation, but go back to the results. But you just have to, again, highlight the key findings. Now, after highlighting the key findings, that is where you are going to give the possible cause of the condition, meaning you have to think of reasons or causes why this condition existed. Okay? Now, this possible reason, class, should be back up with supporting evidence, ha? as you think of the possible reasons why ganito yung kanilang result or ganito yung result ninyo, kailangan hanapan nyo yun ng supporting evidence. So example, sa questionnaire ninyo, mataas yung score nila sa isang area na na-identify nyo sa questionnaire. You have to explain it. Bakit kaya mataas? Bakit dito sa isang area mababa? Okay? So that is how you interpret your result. But then again, the reasons that you're going to state in the discussion section should be backed up with evidences. Now, aside from the cause, you also have to identify possible effect of the results of your study. And we are talking about implication here. So this is your result. Anong magiging effect nun? Ano yung magiging importance nun? Like for example, sa community. Now, if you have unsatisfactory results or condition, you may also recommend. So this is where recommendation takes place. You may also recommend actions or things to be done in order to resolve the unsatisfactory results that you obtain. Now, if you have favorable one, meaning you have good results class, you may also include recommendations on how to strengthen these favorable ones. And paulit-ulit ko itong sinasabi na sa discussion section, you really have to give comparisons of your findings with those of the previous studies. You really have to be clear whether you have the same results or nagdi-disprove yung result ninyo sa existing ones. Okay? So, any question before tayo mag-proceed? Dalawang slides na lang ito and then we are done. Nag-okay na si Dean sa ilipat yung schedule ng defense. Pero wala pang date. Wala questions? So what are the do's and don'ts in making the discussion section? First, you have to read the guidelines. I mean, you have to be familiar with the guidelines. Pero sa institution lang natin ito kasi itong nakasulat dito is for journals. Kasi if you intended to publish your study in a specific journal, you have to abide with their guidelines. And how are you going to make your paper? But sa school, let me just give you an example later for you to follow. Okay, so again, begin with a clear statement of the principal findings of your study, and then reinforce that one with the main takeaway for the reader, and then ayun na, iset up mo na yung discussion part, yung interpretation ng result na yon. And you really have to give implications. Why are these findings important to your reader? Okay, so you have to highlight both the strengths and the limitations of your research, but do not really dwell more on the limitations. You just have to state the limitations, but do not overstate. Huh? And then, ito na, kailangan mo talagang maging clear kung i-accept mo or i-reject mo yung hypothesis mo. And please do not forget to give the reasons why you are rejecting it. For example, kung i-reject mo talaga siya. Okay? And then introduce new or expanded ways to think about the research questions. Meaning at the end of the discussion, do not forget also to give recommendations, especially if you have unresolved problems or unanswered questions. So if dealing with contemporary or ongoing problem, example here is the climate change, you may discuss possible consequences if the problem is avoided. Okay? Depende ito sa study. If your study is like dealing with an existing problem, in the discussion section, you may include discussion on the effects if hindi ma-answer or ma-resolve ang problem na yan. And then be concise. Do not include other things that are not really related to your problem. Now, how about the don'ts? Do not rewrite your abstract class. Later, I will be discussing to you how are you going to write your abstract. But since abstract is a summary of your study, please do not rewrite that one in the discussion section. Please do not use we investigated or we studied. Okay? Please do not use those things. Wait. Okay. Sige. You just used the researchers. Do not use we. Okay? No, do not include new arguments or evidences not previously discussed. Kung wala kasi siya sa introduction niyo, supposedly hindi mo dapat siya ilagay din sa discussion section. But just in case class na you cannot find any supporting evidence from your RRL, you may look for additional ones. Just add it sa paper ninyo. Okay? And then do not apologize. Do not apologize if ever you have negative results or you have limitations in your study. There are really limitations, but it's not your fault naman. For example, yung example ko kanina, na hindi pumayag yung ibang hospitals, it's not under your control. So do not apologize in the discussion section if you have limitations in your study. So do not shy away from speaking on limitations or negative results. Negative results are still considered results. So that is also important. Meron din yan siyang sariling implications. And do not shy away also of stating the limitations of your study, but do not overstate it. Okay? Now, do not overstate also the importance of your findings. Do not make grandiose statement about that. Kasi all studies, kaya nga may recommendation class, kasi it needs further validation, it needs further investigation. Okay, so that's it for the discussion section. Well, I'm opening a sample study. Do you have questions? Ay. Hala. Sige. So let's have an example study na ma-follow ninyo. But this one is a medtech study. I'll look for a BSPH study later. So before tayo pumunta sa discussion section, daanan na lang natin yung mga kailangang daanan dito na important din hahanapin ng panel ninyo. So number 1, do not forget to follow correct title page format. And then that should be followed by the approval sheet. Nasira lang yung format dito, naka-MS Word kasi ito. So this is how it looks like. Ito yung approval sheet natin. You just have to edit things here. Kasi hindi naman yung advisor natin iba-iba. Okay? After that will be the acknowledgement. So remember, meron tayong format for the acknowledgement. You start with God, the Board of Trustees, and the administration of the school. Administrators, I mean. And then followed by the panelist, and then your advisor. After your advisor will be the other people that you want to acknowledge in your study. This might be your respondents. You want to thank them for participating in your study, or other people na naka-help, validators, grammarian, your parents, your friends, if ever they have big contributions to the completion of your research paper. Okay? And do not forget the researchers sa last. Now, this should be followed by the abstract. Okay? Let's give emphasis to this. Sa abstract class, again, it's one page. One page ha. I hope walang susobra kasi sabi ko talaga sa inyo, one page. One page lang yung abstract natin. One page summary of your paper. Walang susobra sa isang page. And then, sa abstract, we do not do indentions. This is how it looks like. Now, anong dapat ilagay sa abstract? Number one, you may provide a summary of the problem of your of your study. Kagaya ng ginawa nila. The first statement here, hindi ko siya ma-highlight kasi hindi ko ito din-download. Again, the first sentence nila is actually talking about the problem of the study. And then after that will be the objective of your study, the main one. Kaya kung titingnan ninyo, the second statement nila here is, ito, the study aimed to determine the impact of the medical fake news. Okay? And then, after the objectives will be the methodology. A summary of the methodology. So look at their third statement. The study was carried out using a questionnaire consisting of demographic data and a series of statements gauged using the Likert scale. Okay, just a summary of the methodology. After the methodology will be the results. Ay, ma-highlight ko pala siya. Bakit hindi ko siya ma-highlight kanina? Ito yung pinakamahaba na part of the abstract class, the result. But I'm not saying that you have to include everything, just the most important ones. Okay? The most important results of your study lang yung makikita sa abstract. Okay? Now, after the result, you have to give a summary also of the conclusion of your study. And if you still have space, you may include the most important recommendation. Okay? Ayun yung mga kailangan ipasok here in the abstract. And then the last part, you have to have keywords. Okay? The keywords are words or phrases that are related to your study that if we are going to include your study in a database, we are going to find it easily just by using the keywords identified. Then the table of contents, ito yung format talaga natin sa table of contents. Then naka-separate yung list of appendices, list of figures, and list of tables. And then you have the introduction. We'll not dwell with this anymore. We are done with the introduction and methodology in the proposal defense. So let's just skip this and wait, let's, ay, no, wala. Balik sa start. Ay, sobraan. Yung part na ito. This one is a discussion. Okay, and then you have the results of your study class. Sira yung format. Give a brief introduction before starting with table number 1. And then do not forget to give a description of each table. Okay? And then table, if you have a questionnaire, you really have to include all the questions there in your questionnaire and give the mean for each question, and then the grand mean after. Do not forget the interpretation for the result. Okay? And then the discussion section. If you're going to look at this class, mas mahaba pa to sa result section. Marami ka kasing i-discuss. Just like them. Ayan, they started with their first SOP actually after restating the purpose of their study and a little background about the methodology. Nag-start na sila sa first SOP, and that is about the demographic profile. And then inisa-isa nila ito. Inisa-isa nila yung demographic profile actually starting with age, for example, or sex. And then take note, as you can see, you have there parenthetical citations, meaning as they discuss the results, they backed it up with literatures. That is why merong proper citation there. So mag-expect din ako sa paper ninyo ng ganito. Hindi pwedeng nag-discuss lang kayo ng nag-discuss and walang supporting evidence, wala man lang akong makita na citation. Meron talaga yung citation kasi nga kailangan nyo ng supporting evidence. Okay? So hanggang ano ito, hanggang last SOP nila yung kanilang diniscuss. And then, meron ata sila sa last part. Ito yung final nila na result, na the results of this study did not show that there is a significant relationship. So this is class rejecting their accepting their null hypothesis. Tapos ayan, dito may nilagay silang limitation of their study. I'm not that sure with the strengths though kasi dinaanan ko lang naman, baka na-miss ko lang yung strength, but we have here the limitations of their study. Yeah, they have the strengths here also sa baba. And then as far as I know, the next part na is about the recommendation. This one here is part of the conclusion, and then we have here this part, the recommendation. This is still based on the findings of their study. So medyo mahaba-haba class yung discussion ninyo, discussion na gagawin ninyo. Then this should be followed by the references. Do not forget to complete the references of your paper. All the parenthetical citations should be properly listed in the references. Walang dapat makalimutan ha, baka hindi makomplete ang references ninyo. And then that should be followed by the appendices. Pero hindi ganito ang format ha, nasira lang siya kasi naka-Microsoft Word. So ito, appendices, you have to name it using letters of the alphabet, Appendix A, and then you have to give titles. But please do not forget to arrange them according to nature. Kung nag-start kayo Appendix A letter, kailangan letters na yan pasunod. Ubusin nyo na yung letters, isa-isa. Like Appendix A, letter to the Dean, Appendix B, letter to the laboratory in charge. Hindi yung Appendix A, letter to the Dean, tapos Appendix B, questionnaire, tapos Appendix C, bumalik kayo sa letter. So ubusin nyo na lahat ng letter before jumping into another type of appendix. Okay? So yung sa kanila kasi nauna yung questionnaire. I think this is followed by the informed consent. Oh yeah, informed consent. And then nahuli yung letters nila pero nakapasunod naman. Okay, and then we have the maps. And then syempre yung last part na is the curriculum vitae. Okay, so that's it for your research. Do you have questions or clarifications? Sorry. Where is this? Not recognized. Wala. Sure na ha?